Hello, this is David Palizzi's final project, doing an oral history. So I started to think about really what program I wanted to focus on as I was completing this project. You know, when I really started at the beginning of this course, I really didn't know a ton about some of the programs that I had heard. I knew the word trio, I knew the word upward bound, but I never really knew what that all meant together. And so that leads us to my decision. I decided to choose Upward Bound as a program to research, one being the first trio access program, and I thought that would have a really rich history to learn from. But also, I really wanted to learn more about this program because I had seen it in so many facets. I had seen it at the University of Wyoming. I had seen it at Ripon College, which is a private liberal arts school in rural Wisconsin. I had also seen it at Colorado State University, and so really wanted to dig into some of that history and learn a little bit more. So that brings us to our first year, 1961. Now, we're going to back up a little bit, and that's intentional, because in 1961, President John F. Kennedy appointed a man by the name of Walter Heller to serve as a chairman on a committee to study the problem of economic poverty in the country. This had become a salient topic in the United States, and President Kennedy wanted to make it a focus point. Unfortunately, as JFK was assassinated, President Kennedy was never able to see this program materialize. However, Heller was still serving as a committee chairman, and he brings his information to President Lyndon Johnson, who supports the idea and wants to provide funding for access-based work to education. And a month later, President Lyndon Johnson gives his famous speech during his State of the Union, where he declares his war on poverty. Which brings us to our next year, 1964. This is when the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 was signed, and this housed the first creation of Upward Bound. Something that I actually learned is that the early initiatives of Upward Bound was actually not started by the Department of Education. It was actually started out of this committee, which was under the Office of Economic Opportunity in 1964. Which brings us to our next year, 1965. Now, at this point, there were 17 different pilot programs of Upward Bound, happening across the United States. So they started to see quite a bit of success with this. Staff members in the Office of the Economic Opportunity had an immense amount of pride in that office. And then that brings us to our next year, 1968. This is really important because in 1968, the Special Services for Disadvantaged Students program begun. What this meant was that now we had SSS, which was formerly known as Special Services for Disadvantaged Students, and then we had Upward Bound and Talent Search, and they formed this federal trio program. What's also important to note is that, as I said earlier, Upward Bound was in the Department of Economic Opportunity and then moved to the Department of Education. So we had actually a shifting of management over this program. And I learned through the research that this was actually a really tough decision to make, as people who had worked closely with Upward Bound were very attached to the program because of its success. Now we're fast forwarding to the year 1972. The significance of this is now Upward Bound formed a branch program called Veterans Upward Bound. This now served a different population while still wanting to increase access for those from underrepresented populations. Veterans Upward Bound aims at working through similar strategies to increase veteran enrollment in higher education. Now we're going to fast forward 4 more years to 1976. The reason this year is important is because this is when the federal government began to fund training for TRIO project directors. This is really important because it streamlined the amount of information that was provided to project directors and allowed everyone to have very similar information. Fast forwarding 4 more years to 1980. This is another big year because this signifies the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. Now, the reason this reauthorization is a focal point for this timeline is because it now included first-generation college students are now eligible to participate in federal TRIO programs like Upward Bound. Now, previously, those students had not been identified, and so now the work shifted a little bit. Then we're going to fast forward to the year 1990. Another branch program is created, and it's called Upward Bound Math and Science Program. This program, similar to Upward Bound, however, now tailors a specific focus to help students enroll in some of the mathematics as well as sciences and overall STEM fields. We're going to fast forward 20 years to 2013 and 2014. I chose this year to focus on the analysis from the Department of Education. Now, they do research to determine how effective a program is, and what they had found was that 86% of students who were participating in Upward Bound immediately enrolled in higher education directly after graduating from high school. This is really important because what this data showed that not only is the program working, but it's showing the immediate impact with students enrolling so quickly. Fast forward one more year to 2015. The reason I chose this year is because this is the last year, or at least most current information about federal funding dollars that were allocated to Upward Bound. As of right now, there was over $43 million that had been allocated, with around 10,000 students participating in the program. The reason this is important because there's lots of conversations right now as the Higher Education Act is going to be reauthorized, and people are wondering what that funding is now going to look like with a new Department of Education chair and things shifting. Overall, I found this project to be really enlightening. I think about what was going on in 1961 and 1964 to where we are now, and I think I'm going to be honest, it's really hard to see where we've come from, because I think what would it look like now if we took the same approach as President Lyndon Johnson, to take a war on poverty and not necessarily target poor people. I think the rhetoric has definitely changed, and I really hope that this funding gets reauthorized and make sure, because I think this program is really important. But also I think learning about the history and how much work has gone into these programs, this wasn't something that has just started, but has rather been around for close to 80 years. And I think to me that is just so important to talk about and always remember where we came from and the people who put all of this work in to make this program what it is now. Thank you so much for taking your time, and have a great day.